China EVs and more, where my co-host Lei Xing and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. If you enjoy this room, please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sino Auto Insights, a Beijing-based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, sir. Good evening from my side. Good morning to you too. Well, this is episode number 68, and I am your co-host Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review. This is another special Friday evening, Saturday morning Dragon Boat Festival episode.
Appreciate your flexibility, Lei.
No, it's really yours. that counts. But I just had my 粽子, so the rice.
Oh, nice.
Well, what's the English for it? The sticky rice dumpling, right? That's
yeah,
what
it's a
called.
dumpling, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they're sweet, sometimes they're savory, right?
Yeah, I had it with the red bean paste. So some of the headlines: early May EV sales are out, and BYD, as we expected, was way out in front of everyone else. And a big stimulus from the Ministry of Finance, cutting the vehicle purchase tax in half as part of a broad economic stimulus package announced on May 31st. Shanghai finally opens with an asterisk. And WM Motor surprisingly submits IPO papers for Hong Kong listing. And boy, are the numbers dreadful.
Way overdue.
Yeah, way overdue. But Buick's making a big move, updating the new logo, unveiling two concepts, one for the US, I guess one for China. And Shenzhen announces a key AV policy supporting level 3 to level 5 autonomous driving. And another related news, Cruise gets that big permit from CPUC.
Coveted.
I think this is the first in America, I believe.
Yes.
Anywhere.
Yep.
Not even Waymo has this. Is that correct?
I think so. I think it's pretty significant.
Yeah, and another big praise from Jim Farley on Chinese EV companies, while Elon gets good luck to the moon comment from President Biden. All right, May sales. Let's begin there. We've got 9 brands that have announced numbers. We'll probably hear Tesla numbers next week, right after the holiday. But it looks like things are getting back on track. Not to 100% yet, but numbers were getting better.
It's good.
BYD, for BYD, it was below my expectations, to be honest. I thought they're going to do like 120, 130,000.
But Dolphin sales fell off a cliff, so I don't know what happened there.
Then you have the Han selling like 22, 23,000 units.
Almost 24.
Yeah, more than everybody else by itself in that list of these startups.
So the three products under BYD that's driving sales is the Han, the Tang, and the Song. Or no, the Han, the Song, and the Qin.
Yeah, and they just launched the latest Tang EV, kind of a refreshed version, a couple days ago. And one of the, I think, surprising brands was Ito, right? They said they got to the 10K in 87 days. So, I think that was more than I expected, to be honest. 5,000 units.
Just some color on the Ito. So Huawei has aggressively moved into the electric vehicle, autonomous vehicle space through a company called Series. And Series is an EV company, and they collaborated on a brand called ITO. So it's a bit confusing, but together, those brands, the ITO and the series, sold over 10,000 units in May. So Huawei is making its way into the segment, into the sector. So,
Well, Huawei continues to reiterate that they're not, in the business of, let's say, making cars, but they are, right?
They're driving a lot of the decision making for sure.
It's almost like, not wanting to say lockdown, but it's a lockdown. It's a bad analogy maybe, but and so like we said quite a few times, June should be again even better than May because you have two things going on. You have the continuing recovery, things are opening up. Okay, thank goodness, and the stimulus, right, which we can get into a little bit, and basically just a few numbers that you need to know is 300,000 RMB. Anything below that, anything below 2.0 liters and below gets the half purchase tax savings.
So this is an all hands on deck subsidy for ICEs and EVs. So
EVs, there are no purchase tax on EVs.
Yep.
So it doesn't really matter. But remember that many cities, Shanghai, Shenzhen being the latest, I think, have come out with additional stimulus, basically giving you 10,000 RMB if you trade in let's say, cash for clunkers. If you trade in a vehicle for a EV, you get 10,000 RMB. And what's transpired since that announcement on May 31st is many brands have basically done this. They've gotten rid of the purchase tax altogether. So basically the other 50%, the brand's saying, we're going to pick it up for you. So no purchase tax if you buy, our brand. And they're also even throwing in insurance. So this, I think, saves many ICE brands kind of not doing well. I think it gives them kind of a bit of a life, I think.
Right.
And it's also worth pointing out, I feel like this time, the reason why, so this is the third time that China has done this. The first time was 2009 and 2010. The second time was 2015 and 2016. In both times, it was 1.6 liter and below. And this time, they've gone up to 2.0 liters and below.
Right.
And if you look at those vehicles that are pretty much 80-90% of the segment of the market, passenger vehicle market. And I think a big reason why that is this is unlike the last two times, which were more geared toward first-time buyers. I believe this time, this is enticing some of the current owners to trade up. Okay, so in other words, all about consumption. Not only for the people who haven't owned a car before, but for the existing owners. Because remember, it's stabilizing the economy, right? That conference that happened, and that's the telltale sign.
And let's remember that a lot of those small displacement engine vehicles are built by state-owned enterprises. So it's propping up a good portion of the domestic automakers. So it's going to help inadvertently, it's going to help Volkswagen. GM to a lesser extent, GM's share is shrinking, Volkswagen's share on the ICE is shrinking. So the domestic automakers are actually gaining on the foreign automakers, the VW brands losing sales, Buick's losing sales, Chevy's sales are close to zero or effectively not doing that well.
And that's why Jim Farley said in that article, and I quote, "There's a shakeout coming, and I feel like that shakeout is going to favor many of the Chinese new players." And another quote, "Old automakers absolutely will get consolidated." So that's. But at the end of the day, it's not to save any brand, to say per se. It's to again boost the economy, which have taken a toll the last couple of months. With
And this needs to happen though, right? Like, because there are just a ton of brands, both on the ICE side and the EV side. And whenever there's a weakness in the market, those lesser players, they close shop. And that's how a market-driven economy works, right? The weaker players die off, get consolidated, and or get acquired for their team, for their IP. And so what we should see is a NIO or an XPeng, a Li Auto, a Neta, or BYD, Tesla gaining strength from getting out of these economic downturns, right?
Yeah, I think the word consolidation has been thrown around for ages, and it's been really slow if we talk about true consolidation. And every time, there seems to be a lifeline thrown by the government.
The local governments, not the central government.
And that kind of survival of the fittest gets delayed a bit. And so that's why, in that sense, I'm not a particular big fan of this type of stimulus. But then at the end of the day, economy, that's all that matters. Enticing consumers to spend and to trading their older cars.
And let's just talk a bit more broadly about what's going on. So last week, Beijing opened up. June 1st, officially, Shanghai opened up, and it's lumpy. So saw a lot of pictures, talked to a lot of people, and some of them are free to roam around Shanghai, no problem. Some are still in limited restrictions, but one thing that's very, very clear is that here in China, everybody's getting tested at least every 48 to 72 hours. It's not required or mandated, but it's a tacit mandate because you can't get into any shops. You can't sometimes get back into your apartment complex unless you show that you've been tested within the last 2 days. And so once that happened in June, we should expect manufacturing to increase significantly because they've sort of, after 75 days, have contained COVID in Shanghai, and hoping that this entire summer, Beijing and Shanghai and other parts of the country are able to still contain it, but it's still going to hang over the economy because no real policies have changed, at least on combating COVID. So that's where the challenges really, really will occur, right? Because what we'll likely see is one or two factories or one or two brands have struggles maintaining production while other brands are, going at 100, 110, 120% capacity because they don't have these issues or challenges, right? And so we had talked about it earlier. It's like a whack-a-mole thing, right?
Yeah. But it's good to see a lot of people posting pictures of eating out, maybe not in restaurants, but also at least outside of restaurants in open air. At least you can get out, buy stuff, eat, drink.
We said these pictures are very jarring, right? Because you see these empty streets one day, and then all of a sudden you see 2:00 in the morning on these streets, people are just hanging out, drinking and stuff like that.
And I say open with an asterisk because whether it's in Shanghai or Beijing, depending on where you live, the district where you are, the situations are slightly different, right? Even in Beijing now, right?
Yes.
Some districts might be a little bit more restrictive than others.
This is how restricted it was last week, Lei. I just wanted to add, DD could not enter other districts. So I live in Chaoyang district, and if I wanted to go to from Chaoyang to Chaoyang, I could call a cab. But if I wanted to go from Chaoyang to Huairou, then I would not be able to do that. That was as of last week, but it's opened back up. So
but China needs these factories humming. That's especially in the auto industry because, again,
I'd argue that the world needs it humming because of inflation, right?
Exactly. And so we said it's going to take the entire second quarter, and that's what it looks like. June should be, barring any surprises, June should be good. June is actually a low.
Yeah.
Seasonally, it's low because March, April are usually the highs, at least in the first half. But it's got flipped on its head because of the Shanghai lockdown.
Yeah, so sales were April and May sales were pushed out to June.
Yeah,
and because of these incentives, we should see a little bump in June.
And things are looking up. So some of the numbers I've seen, the consensus seems to be that, at least from CPCA's point of view, that this stimulus, which the purchase tax cuts in half, which is valid, I believe, until the end of the year, is going to add about 2 million vehicles.
Yeah.
Before, it was about 19 million passenger vehicles. So now the latest prediction is 21 million. I believe 20 million. So the two numbers that are very psychological are 20 million PVs.
Right.
And 5 million NEVs, which I believe is still going to happen. There shouldn't be a problem based on the current, trends and trajectory. And second quarter may even be above 1 million units, based on at least the numbers that have been released so far. Tesla will definitely get back on track. I think they're already nearing full capacity now.
Yes, yeah.
Shanghai
that's what I heard too.
So, yeah. So that's good.
These guys are going to squeeze as much capacity and utilization out as they can, as long as they have the able bodies and the parts to build these cars, because they're just going to put their foot on the accelerator because they're afraid that potentially any outbreak could cut off their production again. So I think these measures that have been put in place are very helpful, testing, but there's always going to be leaks or people that get tested and have the wrong results. But
the other thing I think I just want to mention is I've seen a lot of Chinese press really drilling NIO on them, being now at the bottom of kind of the rankings. I really don't see it that significant. They did 7,000 units, right, in May.
Yeah, I do. I look at it completely differently. Surprise.
No, I mean, just the way that clickbait titles that I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's fair to NIO, but right, because there's so many ways to compare. Sales rankings is only one way that everybody tends to draw conclusions from.
Sure.
But then you look at, we can go into WM Motor. You look at their sales, right? But you look at their profitability numbers. It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Did you see that? I think their 2021 margin was negative 41%.
So,
and they had a huge increase in COGS, I think, for 2021 for some reason. And they lost, I think, over the last 3 years that they've shared the numbers, I think it's 17.4 billion renminbi that they lost.
Yeah. So we should specify that WM and NIO, they go after completely different markets.
Sure. That's why I say, don't compare the sales rankings. Don't compare only the sales rankings. Yeah.
But you and I, over the last 2.5 years, were initially pretty long WM. We thought they had a good team in place. We thought their product was decent, but they have these missteps that were perplexing and head scratching, right?
They had these things happen to them, if you want to say head scratcher or missteps, right? They're in the IPO filings, they reveal that they're in a lawsuit with Geely.
Yes.
That we talked about, I think for like 2.1 billion RMB. They recently recalled some vehicles due to quality, and tons of people have left, right?
Yeah. Including including my old contacts. So,
and it seems to me that the recent companies that have announced IPO intention, wherever the IPOs are, CH Auto, WM Motor, these are the two companies that are, I believe, on the fringe, and they need money.
In deep need of money and capital injection.
Yeah. So I don't know. This is kind of like the last straw or something.
And I'm going to make a broad general statement. If they could go to the private markets, venture capital, private equity to get money, that the challenge is for companies like a WM and a CH Auto is that they probably aren't getting the valuation from those private investors that they want. And so rather than sell the entire company to private investors, they would rather risk going IPO. So that's kind of the decision matrix that they're looking at. So that also should tell you that their valuations among investors is not very high. So they're trying to market that their valuation is X, Y, and Z to outside investors for IPOs, but you can't be that confident about it.
And if you look at over the last, almost a year and a half that we've been doing this China EVs and more, right? What's been happening, the news events, right? There's not that much on WM Motor,
right,
compared to NIO, compared to Li Auto, compared to XPeng. And the numbers, though on paper they look impressive, right? Their sales actually doubled every year the last 3 years, but at a very low base.
Yeah.
That looked good on paper, but if you look at the finances, right, it's something else.
A small portion of their sales were fleet too, right?
Yeah.
So.
And my perception of WM Motor is that they seem to spend on sales and marketing that, to me, a bit weird. Some of the sales and marketing they do.
They got to move the metal, right?
Yeah, and also one of the big turnoffs for me was when they had that W6, they initially marketed it as the first driverless car that you can buy, right? It's autonomous. Well, what's the word? Autonomous washing, right? I didn't like that at all. So, and then these quality problems. I mean, they have quite a few vehicles, but...
And they came out of the gate 3-4 years ago building their own factory. So their balance sheet looks completely different than a NIO or an XPeng. So another reason not to compare vehicle sales and margins and things like that, because their capital structure is completely different than some of their competitors. So
right, they only had just $4 billion in cash at the end of 2021, whereas let's say the NIOs and XPengs, they have 10x as much cash on hand.
That's because they IPO'd.
Well, yeah, that's true. And that's why you need an IPO, because it's like what, chicken and egg, right?
So these are what I had heard. They wanted to go US IPO initially. This was probably 2.5 years ago. That came off the table. And then they wanted to go IPO in Shanghai, but because of the lawsuits, it was going to make it untenable. And so they backed away from that. But now, because they need money so bad, despite the lawsuit, they're still IPOing. So,
and they were also approved to list on the domestic, what's that board, right? And that never happened. So, and now they're going through Hong Kong.
Yeah. So the one thing that's very clear, and this will give you an indication of how competitive this is. There were talks about XPeng trying to move up market because the mass market sub 250, 300,000 RMB segment is so competitive, right? We're talking BYD, Neta. XPeng was playing there, but it is just brutal at that price point. And then Jidu is coming with
I was going to mention that. And NIO's launching the mass brand.
Yeah.
So you can't hide, or right? You're going to face these competition head on. I mean, WM Motor I think they have their hands full.
And this is also why VW is just getting waxed. The ID series vehicles are just getting
Yeah.
Oh, like
I saw
there was a
tweet.
tweet, yeah, about their MSRP, their dealer price, and then they added more money onto the hood. So, the brand statter is in for it has to be a complete overhaul of the China market, I would think, strategy. So,
Yeah. It's what do you call it? Almost like a hot potato? You want to go there?
so what they need to do is they need to reconcile what their original timeline for the ID series is, and then pull in new features and try to get them into a 23 or early 24.
Well, they're doing that. I mean, the first priority for carrier China was to get that OTA done on all the ID vehicles on the market. I think that's happening probably in the second half. I mean, we're almost at the second half of 2022.
But that's still amazing to me, Lei, because that's like blocking and tackling. That's not really strategic. It's like a qualifier. If you can't OTA in China, there are SOE brands that can OTA. So it's just super frustrated for them.
Yeah.
So.
And I know that Carrier is poaching people, So another brand that's steeped in history is Buick. And it was weird because they kind of had that simultaneous announcement. So Buick had the kind of the brand day in China, and then simultaneously it announced that 2020-30 being all electric, but that's in North America.
Yeah.
With the and then they had the Wildcat EV concept. So these are you feel like it's one brand, but there's two separate things going on. And Buick is such a steeped in history in China because it defined the kind of the mid-size executive sedan market with the Buick Century. It defined the family entry car with the Sail, 100,000 RMB family sedan with the Sail. And it defined the MPV market with the GL8. And the rest is history, right? Buick, China is
and they did nothing with it.
Well, they launched this GLA Century. So, right?
I believe GM sales in China was close to 4 million units several years ago.
Yeah.
And now it's closer to...
It's been down.
Two and a half?
Yeah.
Two and a half?
Yeah. And I think Buick, it needs to get that kind of the EV mojo going a bit because it's behind, right?
So the common theme that we want to emphasize, I think, without speaking for Lei, is that the legacies are getting pushed out, elbowed out by the domestic players who have strengthened themselves, number one, and then number two, have used this push to electric vehicles to really catch up or create a new starting line. And now they're almost at a level playing field, at least on the EV side.
Yeah, and one of the Buick's problems was when they launched the 3-cylinder models, it backfired. Okay, so now they went back and relaunched on the models with 4-cylinder engines. Yeah. Because the Chinese consumer perception on the 3-cylinder engines is very bad. So that was a misstep, and which caused Buick sales as well as Chevrolet's, right, to drop. So yeah, I mean this.
So here's the crazy thing about the foreign automakers, and we're also talking the other Germans, we're talking the Koreans and the Japanese too. Is it worth it to invest a lot of capital into the China market moving forward? Because it is just so competitive here, and their sweet spot, the ICE market, is shrinking pretty substantially over the next several years. And we already heard Volkswagen, and we mentioned this last week. You know, I think some of these foreign automakers are going to have to really think about staying in this market, right?
And, if we compare, let's say, Buick and BYD, then, right, BYD is more high-tech, it's more electric, right? And the pricing, competitiveness.
The crazy thing about GM is that the joint venture, the Wuling Hongguang, a $5,000 car, drives a decent bit of their volume, right? If we're looking at their sales volume.
Yeah, and the way with which Wuling moves is light speed compared to these Buicks and Chevrolets, right? How many different variations of the Hongguang Mini EV have they come out? And they've come out with the Air EV for what? Southeast Asia?
Yes, for Jakarta.
These type of things that they're moving very fast. Whereas the Buicks and the Chevrolets are a bit behind.
And this is the biggest thing for me, that they're probably analysis paralysis. They just got to move, like make bold moves. So Wuling, for 2 years, they've sold 30,000 of these Hongguang Mini, like clockwork. You could set your watch to it. They're entering Jakarta. They just said that on June 1st with this Air EV. So it's probably a bit higher end than the Hongguang Mini EV. But by the second half of 2022, they said they're going to enter other international markets. So they're targeting over 1 million sales by next year. I think they're 800,000 units or something like that for 2022 or 2023 or something like that. So these moves need to happen fast. And we're talking a car that is basically a Frankenstein parts bin car with a range of 100 to 120 kilometers, 150 kilometers. So don't think of margins. Don't think of how effective something is. Think of how sticky this vehicle has gotten in a short period of time. That's what they need to kind of shift over to their other legacy brands and products and see what happens, because they have all this data for the GL8, for the Sail, for the Century. So why are you not able to understand what the market wants in China when you understood it so well for the last 20 years? So, and that's not a knock on one brand or one country's brands. It's just legacies in general. Maybe it's just that the Chinese automakers have just really caught up, full stop, right? So let's move it to a couple of announcements, not announcements, but news that I wanted to kind of bring up. Panasonic is going to be building a factory in either Kansas or Oklahoma for support of the Austin Gigafactory. Makes a ton of sense. So in my prior life at General Motors, I supported logistics for the Fairfax factory and the GM factory in Kansas City and the Oklahoma City factory. So the reason they're looking at, one of the reasons Panasonic's looking at Oklahoma City and Kansas is because Oklahoma and Kansas is because there's a history of automotive manufacturing in those states. Tesla's also opening up superchargers in the UK. I think that's pretty cool. They're already opening up their supercharger network to non-Tesla cars in the Netherlands and a couple other European countries. So they're doing it now in the UK. And let me ask you, Lei, what do you think of the ES7? There's a lot more information out on it. I just don't know how that's very distinctive. And it's like this tweener between the ES6 and the ES8, but I just see potential sales cannibalizing ES8 and ES6. So
no, I mean the spotlight is on the ET7 and the ET5. Where ES7, I feel like it's in a bit of a interesting spot,
like no man's land a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean it's NT 2.0, so it looked like a nose job on the ES8.
Yeah, basically, right?
The way I would describe it, but I don't know. I mean, I like the ES6 and the EC6 as in terms of styling and size. ES8 would be too big, so I don't know.
I do like the ES6, the EC6, that little coupe SUV thing, crossover thing, is a little weird. That shape is a little weird to me, so I'd prefer the ES6. But see, and this is where I wanted to kind of counter your point about we shouldn't look at sales, especially for NIO month to month. But 7,000 is actually pretty low. I think they were averaging, I think, 10,000 or 11,000 units, and there's two potential issues, right? One of them, and it could be both at the same time, they're not managing their supply chain very well, and or they're just not selling that many units anymore, right? Maybe they've plateaued a little bit. So either way, to me, that's a bit concerning, right?
I've said this, I'm going to say it again. The magic 10K, if you can't do it consistently, I think that's a very fair benchmark for any of these startups, right? We talked about why, why hamburgers are quarter pounders.
Yeah.
Right? It just 10K, if you can consistently do 10K, you feel better, right?
Yes. Yes.
Psychologically, it's a 5 digit rather than a 4 digit.
And that's why, because they can't even get to 10. So that's why if it was 10, 11, then so be it, right? Then I'm not so concerned. But 7,000 is pretty low, right? So,
But again, at the price point, they're selling over 400,000 RMB, right?
and the other thing that is interesting that kind of goes against NIO is that they still have pretty significant runway because BYD is going to come out with a premium brand. XPeng has announced that they're going to move up market. So they're going to compete more directly with NIO. But there's still not a domestic automaker outside of Hi-Fi, which didn't announce sales, which probably tells you that they're not selling very well. There's no other domestic automaker or EV maker that's in the premium segment. So NIO should be just crushing it. I don't know.
Well, Great Wall has that salon, kind of the high end, and then BYD's obviously coming out with the high end.
So I'd written in the newsletter that I was a bit concerned because for those that don't know, I grew up in Michigan, Pontiac boy, so just outside of Detroit. So I pay very close attention to the U.S. auto industry, specifically what's going on in Michigan and those lean states like in the Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin. And I was worried about Michigan missing out on some of those investments that were made, or announcements anyways. And so earlier this week, Ford announced that they'll be investing, I think, $2 billion in the state of Michigan, adding 3,000 jobs. So what we're starting to see is foundational moves by automakers, battery cell manufacturers, and you and I heard some things from our good friend about some aggressive moves by some EV makers here in China to the US market. So I think in the next, let's say 36 months, Lay, it could get really exciting, really fun to watch the US market kind of evolve. So,
well, Jim Farley, right, in that article, he said China EV makers, if you look at it, 25,000 bill of material for an EV in China is probably the best in the world. And I think they're incredibly undervalued. They haven't shown any interest in exporting other than Norway. Pretty soon that'll be wrong.
His international team's feeding him bad intel, man.
Yeah. So quickly, the only other thing is the Shenzhen had this administrative regulations on intelligent connected vehicles, ICVs. That's the China terminology. And the only thing I'll mention is very interesting to me was this is for conditionally automated driving, highly automated driving, and fully automated driving, which essentially are L3, L4, L5, respectively. And the responsibility for the L3 says that the driver will be responsible for any accidents, which is very interesting in the conditionally automated driving condition. I've not seen this anywhere else. And if you remember, right, Mercedes, when they, launched L3, right, they said they will be responsible,
right,
during that situation.
Well, it's in Europe and the United States, that's still pretty clear. The responsibility once you get to L3 shifts to the automaker or the product owner.
Yeah. So, I haven't read this thoroughly, but it looks to be one of the first local policies supporting kind of L3 autonomous driving. So we'll see how it is a draft for common edition right now. So we'll see what happens. But I mean, it's Shenzhen is ahead again,
leading the way.
Leading the way. So the only thing I can add is on the purchase tax I'll give you a comparison. So the 60 billion that Li Keqiang announced in that previous meeting, gradual reduction of 60 billion in purchase tax. To put that into perspective, in 2021, China's purchase tax revenues was 352 billion. So 60 billion of that, you can do the math, right? Roughly how much?
This indicates to you how severe they feel the downturn is, because if we are exchanging USD to RMB, that's like 9 billion US dollars. So, and if we're keeping score since 2009, the Chinese government has probably invested 80 billion US to build out this EV sector and the battery cell manufacturing sector. So not an insignificant number, 9 billion US dollars to really goose the market. That's a big commitment. That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Li, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.